Greetings, subscribers! In recent weeks, I've been reviewing horror film series in the style of my two favorite movie critics growing up, Siskel and Ebert, who would either vote thumbs up or down for every movie they reviewed. Some of my subscribers requested that I review the Friday the 13th series, so today I'll do just that. But first I want to quickly clarify three things. 1. Sometimes I give away spoilers, other times I try to hold back from that like I did in my Psycho video. However, today, I'm going to feel free to spoil as much as I want, particularly for the first Friday movie. So, if you've never seen these movies, spoiler alert, you've been warned. 2. I'm a fan of Friday the 13th comic books, video games, toys, and more. I also enjoy visiting Blairstown, New Jersey, where the first Friday movie was shot, and the town now holds several Friday festivities. However, today, I'm going to try to put that all aside and just look at these movies as individual films. 3. My opinions are only just that and nothing more, and I always have the right to change my mind someday. Otherwise, I'd like to get started. 1980's Friday the 13th. If you don't remember this movie, I'll try to quickly refresh your memory. It opens one night in 1958 with two Camp Crystal Lake counselors sneaking up to a second floor to make out and getting killed by a mysterious murderer. It cuts to the then present of 1980 when some teenagers are preparing to reopen the camp. The people of the local town warn them that bad things happen there. One girl gets killed in daylight before she arrives. The rest get killed at camp that night, one by one, up until the last one, Alice. An older woman suddenly shows up out of nowhere, explains the backstory, and then attempts to kill Alice. But eventually, Alice kills her. Now, the whole movie, it was supposed to be a mystery who the killer was, but how were we viewers supposed to guess that the killer was a character they never even showed us once or mentioned once? I mean, come on! Think of all the good mystery horror movies you've seen. Psycho, Get Out, The Sixth Sense, Jacob's Ladder, just to name a few. When you look back at these movies a second time, they're all filled with subtle hints of the big surprise that's coming at the end. Even the low-budget cult classic Sleepaway Camp had hints of what's coming. But Friday the 13th has virtually none of that. The closest I could find was when the truck driver briefly mentioned that a couple got killed there in 1958 and a boy drowned there in 57. So we can piece together that the couple we saw there at the beginning in 58 was probably the same couple who let Jason drown in 57. Also, if you look closely, Mrs. Voorhees arrives in the same Jeep that Annie earlier hitchhiked in. Okay, but is that really enough to be well-crafted mystery writing? We see that Mrs. Voorhees kills everyone without saying one word to them. Then she stops and tells Alice the whole story before trying to kill her. Why did she explain things to Alice when she didn't explain it to anyone else? Because the writers could not think of a better way to tell the story to the viewers. At the end, there is a very well done shock moment when we think the movie is about to end, and suddenly Jason Zombie jumps out and grabs Alice. But did the script have any hints beforehand that Jason could come back as a zombie? Zero. In fact, I know for trivia that that moment was not even in the original script. The makeup artist of the film, Tom Savini, who had recently gained acclaim for his work on George Romero's zombie movie Dawn of the Dead, came up with the idea of putting a zombie in the movie. The makeup artist suggested it to the writer and director. It's a scary moment, but doesn't fit as part of a coherent story. Frankly, if I had to teach a college course in mystery writing, then I would use this film as a textbook example for how not to write a mystery. Anyway, mystery aside, there's no witty or memorable dialogue. Nothing sounds like we're getting a nice inside look at a conversation which real people might have. What does the snake scene have to do with the plot? Or the scene of strip monopoly? A lot of ideas here were clearly inspired by Psycho, from the mother speaking as her dead son instead of the son speaking as his dead mother. Also, the way the movie starts off with us thinking Annie will be the main character, but then she suddenly unexpectedly gets killed off, mirrors the character of Marion Crane in Psycho. The music, by Harry Manfredini, sounds like it was meant to be an imitation of both the music from Psycho and Jaws. So many of these characters look alike, it's hard to tell one from another, especially in the dark. None of the cast members playing counselors give very impressive performances, not even young Kevin Bacon. Betsy Palmer is okay, nothing more. When this ending fight scene goes on and on for so long, there's no explanation for why it was so hard for Mrs. Voorhees to kill Alice, after it was so quick and easy for her to kill everyone else. The basic setting of being in these small woods and cabins at night during the pouring rain is well established. Tom Savini does a good job with makeup and effects, but that's not enough to make a whole movie. I realize this movie was made on a fairly low budget of about $500,000, but look at some of this poor handheld camera work, particularly when people are talking during car rides. Despite my rants, I actually really don't want to insult this movie as much as I'm doing, so I'll stop myself for now and just say, I vote thumbs down. Just 1 year later, in 1981, Friday the 13th Part 2 hit theaters. I'll try to quickly refresh memories. The opening shows us Alice at home shortly after the events of the first movie, and she quickly gets killed by Jason. Then it cuts to 5 years later when counselors are beginning their time at a counselor training center, which is also attached to Crystal Lake. Do camp counselor training centers even exist? I'm not familiar with them. Anyway, one by one, Jason starts killing the counselors here. Halfway through the movie, a cop tries to chase Jason through the woods and finds a shed which Jason lives in. The cop gets killed there. Then at the end, the final girl, Ginny, runs from Jason and coincidentally ends up at the shed. She finds Mrs. Voorhees' decapitated head and some of her old clothes. So Ginny puts on these clothes, and when Jason catches up, Ginny tries to convince him that she is Mrs. Voorhees, playing a psychology game. Betsy Palmer actually does a brief cameo, showing us Jason's hallucination. This movie was made on a much bigger budget than the first one, $1.25 million. It was directed by Steve Miner, who worked as associate producer on the first film. And although Miner might not be Steven Spielberg, when I looked at his IMDb page, he actually has some pretty impressive projects to his credit. I thought the casting here was much better than in the first film. The counselors were distinct. It was easy to tell one from another. There was Jeff, who had blonde hair and wore a newsboy hat, Terry, who was in such great fitness and had the dog Muffin, Mark, who was once so strong but now in a wheelchair, Ted, who was so goofy. I could go on. Unlike the first film, this movie had no mystery. That sounds like a step down, but simplicity can be effective if it's well done. I find it more entertaining than poorly done mystery. The cinematography here was much better storyboarded than in the first film. That helps make the suspense and excitement here work better. Plus, when people are talking during car rides, I can actually look at it without feeling disgusted. There are scenes of characters actually talking about what's happening. It makes the movie feel much more coherent. I think the scene of the cop getting lost in the woods and realizing that he's running in circles is actually very well done. I don't like how when Jason pops up at the end to attack Ginny and Paul, it just dissolves till the next day, showing us Ginny survived, but not really explaining how. Then it cuts to showing us Mrs. Voorhees' head in the shed, but I think it's actually now Paul's head, telling us Paul somehow got killed and we didn't see it. I'm not even 100% sure about that. This movie is by no means perfect nor a masterpiece, but it is certainly good enough for me to vote thumbs up. 1982's Friday the 13th Part 3. Set the very next day after the events of the previous movie, some teenagers are driving to hang out at Crystal Lake. These teenagers are written to be funny, but they're not. I can't tell one girl from another. The acting here is worse than either of the first two films. These characters drive to a barn near a house. They have an encounter with motorcyclists who they piss off. The motorcyclists secretly chase them back to the barn for revenge, but end up being attacked by Jason. This time, Jason's background story is completely meaningless. Any scene without him murdering someone is completely boring, and the kill scenes themselves aren't even that entertaining. I'm not sure if the death scenes are intended to be scary or funny. I don't find them to be either. When it's established at the end which girl is the final girl, I can't even tell her apart from the other girls at the beginning. This whole movie I don't even know who I'm rooting for. These characters are just so unlikable that I don't know who I'd rather see get killed. I should mention that during this movie's theatrical release, it was in 3D, and it's pretty clear which shots were once special to see on the big screen in 3D. But here on my regular TV in my living room, that's all meaningless. Research says this movie was shot on a bigger budget of $2.25 million, but I'd never guessed by watching. It's quite surprising that Steve Miner returned to direct this film. I don't find his work here to be nearly as good as with Part 2. This movie introduced Jason wearing the iconic hockey mask, but there really wasn't much of an introduction. Of course, this is all just my opinion, but I really don't have many good things to say about this movie. I obviously vote thumbs down. In 1984, there was Friday the 13th, the final chapter. Final? Yeah, right. This movie is about a family named the Jarvises who live near Crystal Lake. The son, Tommy, played by Corey Feldman, has a hobby of making masks. The character's name Tommy was a nod to Tom Savini, the makeup artist who worked on the first Friday movie and returned for this one. A group of teenagers are going to rent the cabin next door to the Jarvises. These teens act the same as all other teens in the series. For the third straight Friday movie, we see teens skinny dipping. These actors give weak performances with poor dialogue. The first time I saw this, I didn't even notice that one of them was played by Crispin Glover, aka George McFly from Back to the Future. These uninteresting characters have no chemistry together. Of course Jason soon starts killing them one by one. Are the deaths scary, exciting, or funny? None of the above. At the end, Tommy uses his makeup skills to disguise himself as young Jason, which confuses the real Jason and throws him off guard, giving Tommy a chance to kill him. It's kind of similar to what Ginny did at the end of Friday Part 2, but I was okay with that. I thought this movie's ending idea was pretty cool. But was it enough to save the whole movie from the poor pacing and all the other problems? Not for me. I vote thumbs down. In 1985, Friday the 13th, A New Beginning was released. It opens with Corey Feldman reprising his role as Tommy Jarvis, seeing two people digging up Jason's grave. Then we see an older Tommy Jarvis, played by a different actor, wake up as he's being taken to a small institution where the rules are fairly loose. This institution is run by a guy named Matt, played by actor Richard Young, who I recognize from Indiana Jones and the Last Crusade. There's a kid named Reggie who is not a patient but just hangs around because his grandfather works there. There's a very important scene in which an overweight patient named Joey annoys a strong patient named Vic who's working with an axe. And Vic suddenly kills Joey and gets arrested. One paramedic named Roy seems particularly disgusted by the death. Then we start seeing people in this town getting killed by someone who we never see. We suspect it's Jason, but it's not until 1 hour and 10 minutes into the film that we finally see it is in fact Jason, and there's no explanation for how he came back to life for this movie. In the climax, Jason chases two survivors to a local barn, setting up a scene reminiscent of Friday Part 3. Pam takes a chainsaw and fights Jason. It's a colorful chainsaw versus machete scene. The scene ends with Jason falling onto this spike bed and dying. But when the mask falls off, we see it's not really Jason, but Roy the paramedic. He's been dressing up as Jason killing people the whole movie. It's later explained that Roy was the father of Joey, who died earlier. And when Roy lost his son, he just went crazy and started killing people. So what did I think of this movie? I suppose it is interesting the way the writers tricked us by having the killer turn out to be someone dressed up as Jason. But beyond that, I was not impressed by the script. So many characters were written with no depth, played by bad actors. I understand the filmmakers wanted Corey Feldman to do the lead role for this movie, but he wasn't available for anything more than a cameo because of his commitment to filming Goonies. So we weren't given the actors which the filmmakers originally wanted. And I should hope a lot of these characters we ended up with were not the filmmakers' first choice. There's that guy who lives with his mother, rides a motorcycle around town, and annoys the hell out of everyone. I don't know if I was rooting for him to live or die. He's a fictional character. I will say the kid Reggie was a good character. Honestly, I probably liked him more than Tommy Jarvis in the previous movie. I probably was supposed to laugh at the scene with the guy getting killed while sitting on the toilet in an outhouse, but I didn't. Like parts 3 and 4, I wasn't even especially entertained by the death scenes. I was bored with the whole movie, waiting for it to end. I was very tempted to press the fast forward button, but I felt like that'd be cheating my viewers. And the result of me sitting through this one is, I vote thumbs down. In 1986, there was Friday the 13th Part 6, Jason Lives. This movie starts off with an even older Tommy Jarvis, played by yet another actor, driving with his friend to Jason's burial site. They dig up Jason's grave and stab his body with a metal rod. They choose to do this during a lightning storm of all possible times. A bolt of lightning strikes the rod, and the electricity brings Jason's body back to life. Kind of reminds you of Frankenstein. Tommy runs towards the police, who put him behind bars. It's mentioned that the area is now called Forest Green, as nobody wants to call it Crystal Lake after the history of Jason's murders. We see 2 camp directors driving on their way to reopen the old camp. One is played by actor Tony Goldwyn, who also played Carl in Ghost. It should come as no surprise that Jason kills them both. Some teenagers, including the sheriff's daughter, have to reopen the camp. Then there's a scene of Jason randomly killing people playing paintball in the woods, no real connection to the plot. Going back to the camp, when kids arrive, it becomes the first time in the series we ever actually see kids at camp. Before we'd only see counselors getting ready to open the camp. I do wish the filmmakers explained why these kids are going to summer camp when it's clearly autumn. Towards the end, the sheriff's daughter helps Tommy escape from jail. Tommy says the only way to kill Jason forever is to drown him in his original resting place, the lake. I don't understand why drowning there now would kill him if it once made him immortal. Tommy eventually executes his plan, and the movie ends. Okay, so time for my opinion? I think the basic story is quite ridiculous. That said, there are actually quite a few good qualities to this movie. It's well-paced and entertaining. It has some pretty decent lighting for the night scenes, and some nice storyboarding. Some of the idiot characters are equally as funny as they are stupid. This movie actually gives me some laughs. I like the scene when the guy is driving his RV, listening to music, and doesn't realize Jason is killing his girlfriend in the RV's bathroom. There's also nice nods to other horror movies. Tommy at one point says he's near Karloff's General Store. That has to be a nod to Boris Karloff, who once played Frankenstein and the Mummy. One girl in camp named Nancy is having nightmares. I interpret that as a nod to the Nancy character from A Nightmare on Elm Street. One of the female counselors has a shirt that says Baker on the back. That could be a nod to Angela Baker from the Sleepaway Camp series. It's also worth noting that Kevin Williamson, who wrote movies such as Scream and I Know What You Did Last Summer, said he really likes this movie and took a lot of inspiration from it for his screenwriting. I can see that. There are both good and bad things I can say about this movie, but in my mind, the good outweighs the bad. It's quite an enjoyable popcorn flick. Therefore I vote thumbs up. Then in 1988, there was Friday the 13th Part 7, The New Blood. This movie opens with a house near Crystal Lake. A little girl named Tina hears her parents fighting, and it sounds like the father is hitting the mother. Tina runs to a rowboat and takes it out in the lake. The father runs out on a covered wooden dock and tells the girl to come back. She says she wishes her father was dead. Suddenly, the dock falls apart, killing him. It then cuts to Tina as a teenager. The mother is driving her back to the home she grew up in, planning to meet a therapist there, who believes that's the place to cure Tina's problems. Signs say Crystal Lake. Apparently, the area is no longer called Forest Green. The house next door has all typical Friday the 13th teenagers. One guy, Nick, seems interested in Tina. The therapist gets Tina to use more mind powers. She stands out by the lake at night, wishes her father would come back to life, but instead, Jason comes back to life. And of course, Jason starts killing random people in the area. We see some examples of Tina using more powers, making a television fly, making rooms shake, and being able to see other people in the area die before and while their deaths happen. About an hour into the movie, Tina finds old newspaper articles about Jason Voorhees and suddenly realizes that the man she brought back to life from the lake, the man who's been killing people, is Jason. And at the end, when the only characters still alive are Tina and Nick, there's a scene of Jason attacking them on a different dock, and by Tina's powers, her father pops out of the lake and kills Jason. And then the movie ends. Okay, so what was my opinion of this movie? Before I get into that, let me explain. I assumed that the original idea here was to have a Jason vs. Carrie movie. But since rights to Carrie could not be acquired, this Carrie-type character named Tina was created. Anyway, besides that, what makes this Friday movie different than most? Not much. At least Tina, her mother, the therapist, and Nick are distinct characters. It's easy to tell one from another. But aside from that, it's just a lot of characters we don't know very well, played by actors that are not that good, getting killed one after another. Jason either kills them for having sex or going skinny dipping. I will say Jason now looks grosser than ever, with maggots coming out of him. This is the first movie when Jason was played by actor Kane Hodder, who is very popular with fans because he loves playing Jason and is friendly to fans at conventions. I've met him at conventions, nice guy. But as a movie, is this very good? No, I don't think so. I vote thumbs down. Then in 1989, there was Friday the 13th Part 8, Jason Takes Manhattan. The title was obviously a parody of the 1984 film, The Muppets Take Manhattan. Whatever. This movie is Jason climb onto a cruise ship headed to New York, on which high school seniors are having their graduation trip. Jason kills people on the ship. Lots and lots of people. Over an hour into the movie, the few survivors finally reach Manhattan. Of course Jason follows them and kills more people there. The climax ends with the two survivors in a New York sewer. Do they meet the Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles? No, they just put toxic waste all over Jason. Does that turn him into the Toxic Avenger? No, Jason already looks close enough to Toxie. Instead, this waste turns him into a child again. So what do the survivors do? They leave him there as a suffering child, go to Times Square, and the movie ends. Now, my opinion? Many fans say this is the worst Friday movie ever. They hate the misleading title suggesting the majority of the movie will be set in Manhattan, and only less than a third turns out to be. But I actually think this movie is at least better than parts 3, 4, and 5. Even with the misleading title, I still find it more interesting to see Jason killing inside a cruise ship than just another movie by Crystal Lake. I appreciate that the filmmakers tried to do something different. The acting here is bad, but not as bad as some of the previous installments. Most of these annoying characters are certainly not interesting. Half of them I'm almost rooting for Jason to kill. Most of the few New York scenes are clearly not really filmed in New York. There's a cute moment at the end when several New York teenagers want to attack Jason, but he just lifts his mask to scare them and they run away. But for me, saying this installment is better than parts 3, 4, and 5 really isn't saying much. In the end, I still have to vote thumbs down for this movie. In 1993, there was Jason Goes to Hell the Final Friday. It was obvious that the studios wanted to imitate the name draw of the 1991 film Freddy's Dead: The Final Nightmare. The movie opens with Jason being tricked into getting surrounded by a task force who fire endless bullets at him, blow him up, but his heart and brain remain. They all think he's dead, but they're being watched by Duke the Vigilante who knows better. Jason is then able to transfer his consciousness into a doctor, then into another person, and so on. So throughout this movie, Jason keeps using other people's bodies to kill. At one point, Duke explains that Jason actually had a sister who went on to have a daughter and granddaughter, and only Jason's blood relatives can kill him permanently. And while Jason can't stay in most human bodies for too long, he can stay in another Voorhees body forever. Eventually, his niece stabs him with a dagger and kills him. Then for the final shot, we see Jason's mask laying on the ground the next day, while Freddy Krueger's glove grabs it and brings it down to hell, setting up a Freddy vs. Jason movie that fans have been forever dying for. So what was my opinion of this movie? Well, it sure did feel different than any other Jason movie, but the main reason I can't credit the filmmakers for doing something different here was because it didn't seem like that's what they were really trying to do. It seemed like they had an idea for a different movie about a killer who could transfer soul and consciousness into other bodies, and just decided to alter the script to make it about Jason. I can't confirm that, but that's what I suspect. I mean, who was this character Duke and where did he come from? Since when did Jason start transferring his soul and consciousness into other bodies? And where did this idea about Jason having a sister come from? This movie had one scene that appeared to be an imitation of the ending of Halloween. Another scene of exploring the old Voorhees house and finding the Necronomicon book from the Evil Dead movies. I guess they were suggesting someone in the Voorhees family was reading it, and that might explain Jason coming back to life? Does this mean Jason has been a deadite the whole time? Anyway, this movie contains more bad acting, uninteresting characters, poor pacing, etc. It doesn't feel like just another bad Friday movie. It feels like a completely different kind of bad movie. Therefore I vote thumbs down. Then in 2001 there was the 10th installment, Jason X. Apparently they weren't yet ready to give us Freddy vs. Jason. I assume the title was a parody of Malcolm X, though I don't see much connection. And considering what serious topics Malcolm X brought up, I don't think it's cool to parody the movie that way. Anyway, in 1996 there was both Hellraiser Bloodline and Leprechaun 4 in Space, both taking horror villains of franchises to outer space. And apparently in 2001 the studios now thought it was time to take Jason to outer space. This movie opens in the then not too distant future of 2008. Jason is tied up in a research facility. A doctor of a different facility arrives with several workers of his own. Note this doctor is played by David Cronenberg, director of the Fly remake, The Dead Zone, and many more. Cronenberg's character wants Jason moved to another facility in Scranton. When they uncover Jason, he's already awake and loose and kills everyone but Rowan. She tricks Jason into going into a deep freeze capsule, but a leak puts Rowan herself in a deep freeze. Cut to 4,047 years later, the year 2455, when some human explorers find these frozen bodies. Note that when they see Jason's hockey mask, it's mentioned that the game of hockey was outlawed in the year 2024. That's this year. Let's see what happens in the next few months. They bring the frozen bodies to a spaceship and take off. It's later explained that all life on Earth died, and humanity relocated to a planet they call Earth 2. The rocket connects with a much larger spaceship. There, Rowan awakens first. We learn that a woman named KM is actually a robot. Jason wakes up and starts killing people. Soldiers think they can kill Jason, but they can't. 1 hour and 8 minutes into the movie, KM gets an upgrade and is able to kill Jason. However, AI technology brings him back to life as a half-zombie, half-robot called Uber Jason. He eventually gets blown into outer space. It appears he's able to fly back in the direction he wants, but a soldier in a spacesuit sacrifices himself to grab Jason and take him flying in a different direction. Jason ends up in a lake on Earth 2, and that's how the movie ends. Now, my opinion? I thought the writer and director knew how silly the story was and knew how to make it enjoyable. Almost all the death scenes are fun. There's so many witty lines that make me laugh. The scene of KM with an upgrade is nicely done. A scene of creating holograms to make Jason think he's by Crystal Lake should bring a smile to most viewers' faces. Is the acting that good? No, but I didn't really care. All the lighting is fine. I see inspiration from both Star Trek and Alien. I'm glad the filmmakers took another chance of doing something different with Jason, and this time it worked for me. A lot of random gags entertained me. There's one scene of a girl being sucked into space and she says, "This sucks on so many levels." Roger Ebert said that line described the movie. Many people might agree with him, and I would not recommend this movie to everyone, but I still remember back in 2001 I had a blast seeing it in theaters, and I just watched it again to make this video and I still enjoy it. So I can definitely vote thumbs up for this one. In 2003, there was Freddy vs. Jason. Since this is both a Jason and Freddy movie, I reviewed it in last week's video, Every Nightmare on Elm Street movie voted by Thumb. Maybe someday my opinion of this movie will change, but it hasn't yet. And to me, it just feels like a waste to repeat everything I already said about this movie in last week's video. So if you want to know the reasons I dislike this movie, please watch last week's video, Every A Nightmare on Elm Street movie voted by Thumb. All I'm going to say today is, I vote thumbs down. In 2009, a Friday the 13th reboot was released. During the opening credits, we see what is pretty much a black and white remake of the original film's climax. It cuts to the then present of 2009 with some young campers at Crystal Lake. They're pretty typical Friday the 13th characters. At night they split up. Some explore the nearby old camp. Suddenly, Jason shows up without a hockey mask and kills. This Jason runs and slams things. It's all quick-paced and very exciting. When there's one girl left, it's assumed that Jason will kill her, but then, 23 minutes into the movie, the opening title appears. It then cuts to 6 weeks later. Another group of youngsters are driving to a nearby cabin owned by one of their parents. The lead of these characters is Jenna, played by Danielle Panabaker, who I know is Caitlin Snow from The Flash. At a local store, they cross paths with a character named Clay, brother of one girl from the earlier crew in this movie. Clay is played by Jared Padalecki, best known as Sam in Supernatural. The group of youngsters go to their cabin, while Clay goes around town asking if anyone's seen his sister. About 42 minutes into the movie, Jason kills someone in a barn, finds a hockey mask, and puts it on. Clay ends up at the cabin of these other characters, and Jenna says she'll join him in his search for his sister. That night, Jason starts killing people in the cabin. The power goes off so they can't call anyone. We eventually see that Clay's sister is not dead, but Jason is keeping her chained up in a lair. This is when the Jason of this reboot really does not seem like the Jason we know from other movies. I'm not certain of the reason he keeps this one girl a prisoner when he kills everyone else. Maybe because the girl kind of looks like his mother, Mrs. Voorhees? As Jason goes on killing, I really don't find the horror deaths to be nearly as exciting or suspenseful as in the first 20 minutes. At the end, the two survivors, Clay and his sister, kill Jason. The next day, they throw his body in a lake, but then he pops up and the movie ends. So, my opinion of this movie? After the first 20 minutes, it's really not that good. The scenes without horror are very boring, and the scenes with horror aren't that exciting. During the climax, I just wanted this movie to end. The music is nothing special, although the storyboarding is pretty decent. The characters are not interesting or likable. Note that I saw this movie in a theater back in 2009, and now watching it for this video, most of it did not look familiar. And I doubt I'm going to remember much of what I just saw. People say remakes are never as good as the original. I have to say, I think this is at least better than the first Friday the 13th movie, or parts 3, 4, and 5. Although that's not saying much. And this is certainly not as good as parts 2, 6, or Jason X. In the end, I'm going to vote thumbs down for this movie. Okay, so that about concludes what I want to say about the Friday the 13th movies. But before ending this video, I just want to acknowledge that there was a TV series called Friday the 13th, which ran from 1987 to 1990. And it was produced by Frank Mancuso Jr., who also produced all the movies from part 2 to 8. However, this series had zero ties to the Friday the 13th movie story. This show is about two people who inherit an antique store, which turns out to have all haunted items. Every episode was about a different customer's experience buying a haunted item. Anyway, going back to the Friday movies, these reviews make it sound like I hate Friday the 13th. But believe it or not, I don't. I love many comics, I've enjoyed video games, toys, etc. I also love visiting Blairstown, New Jersey, where the first film was shot. I like the character of Jason equally as much as I like Michael Myers. I just think as individual movies, they're a lot more good Halloween movies than Friday the 13th. In fact, I'd say I like the character of Jason more than I like Freddy Krueger. When I watch those two fight in Freddy vs. Jason, I actually root for Jason. I just think many Nightmare on Elm Street movies, as individual movies, are better than most Friday movies. But if the studios came to me and said, "Hey Joe, we want to hire you to write and produce a new Friday the 13th movie," I would be thrilled to take their offer. I could see myself putting in the endless hours that filmmakers go through, guiding my own Friday the 13th movie, and never getting bored. If subscribers request it, I could make a whole video talking about what I do for my own Friday the 13th movie. But back to my main point, I just happen to think that as individual movies, most Friday the 13th movies we've been given are not that good. But of course, everything I've said here is just my opinion and nothing more. And I encourage all viewers to please leave your comments below letting me know what you think. I love discussing these things with fans. I hope your comments will get me to look at these movies in a whole new way. Please hit like, and if you want to stay notified for more of my videos, then please feel free to hit that subscribe button and hit the bell. I would love to have you. Thank you.